Did you know there are no late fines on overdue materials at QPL? We want to make sure everyone can use the library's resources, no matter their circumstances. For more details on QPL's elimination of late fines, visit queenslib.org/goodbye late fines. School is in session and we have free help for homework. BrainFuse Help Now offers homework help, online tutoring, and more school support for kids in grades K-12 daily from 2 to 11 p.m. A library card and Wi-Fi connection are all that your child needs in order to participate. Visit queenslib.org/brainfuse to get started. The next election takes place on November 8th, and early voting starts on October 29th. Visit our blog for more important dates, voting FAQs, voting plans, and voter resources.
Welcome to Queens Public Library's Talk with Ken Auletta, author of Hollywood Ending, Harvey Weinstein and the Culture of Silence. The Daily Beast writes, a thoughtful, probing book, nuanced in ways missing from the screaming headline revelations of the story as it unfolded. The insoluble riddle of how so much good and evil could reside in one man is the abiding mystery that gives this book its fascination. If he had done nothing else, Ken Auletta deserves great credit for forcing his readers to confront the fact that evil does not thrive in a vacuum, and that Harvey Weinstein, as bad as he was, had far too much help along the way. The National Board of Review writes, legendary media reporter Auletta was on to Weinstein as a violent bully and abuser in 2002, calling the producer a self-absorbed narcissist in a profile for The New Yorker. Auletta's new book has marinated over the years and benefits from 200 interviews to paint a fuller and darker picture of Weinstein, among one of America's keenest observers of power, from Wall Street to Hollywood. Ayad Akhtar, author of Homeland Elegies and winner of the Pulitzer Prize, writes, beyond its gripping portrait of a gifted producer, profligate businessman, serial rapist, and likely sociopath, Auletta's magisterial account is a definitive report of corruption, commerce, and complicity in America's dream factory. Judicious, vivid, utterly engrossing. Finally, Graydon Carter, editor, Air Mail, writes, you think you know everything about the deplorable Harvey Weinstein? You don't. The incomparable Ken Auletta delivers revelation after revelation. Hi, I'm Brian Alessandro. For those of you who don't know me, I have written for Interview Magazine, Newsday, Pank, Huffington Post, Lambda Literary, and I've recently adapted Edmund White's A Boy's Own Story into a graphic novel for Top Shelf Productions, which will be released this Christmas. Additionally, I co-edited Fever Spores, The Queer Reclamation of William S. Burroughs, an anthology of essays and interviews about Burroughs for Rebel Satori Press. I'm also the co-founder and editor-in-chief of the literary journal, The New Engagement. My first novel, The Unmentionable Man, was published in 2015. My first feature film, Afghan Hound, was produced in 2011. It's currently streaming on Plex, Tubi, and Amazon. My new novel, Performa non grata, will be released in April 2023 by Rebel Satori Press. Culture Connection, curated by Daniel Zaleski and now in its 9th year at the Queens Public Library, is proud to present international artists from emerging talent to award-winning masters. These disciplines include music, theater, author talks, and film. Now expanding into a virtual format, Culture Connection is currently reaching a global audience. Ken Auletta inaugurated the Annals of Communication column and profiles for The New Yorker in 1992. This is his 13th book. 5 of his previous books were national bestsellers, including Three Blind Mice, How the TV Networks Lost Their Way, Greed and Glory on Wall Street, The Fall of the House of Lehman, and Googled, The End of the World as We Know It. Ken, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So, Ken, you first wrote an article for The New Yorker 20 years ago about Harvey Weinstein, in which you chronicled how volatile and even violent he was to his employees and collaborators. You confronted Weinstein on the rumors of his sexual abuses, but he denied them. Please tell us about this and why the New Yorker did not run that aspect of the story, and how exposing Weinstein maybe became your semi-obsession, as you recently said on 60 Minutes to Leslie Stahl.
I had heard that he allegedly raped a woman by the name of Rowena Chu at the 1998 Venice Film Festival. A producer on Shakespeare in Love told me that story off the record. I couldn't use her name then. I can now use it because I use it in the book with her permission. And I heard another woman who was her boss, Zelda Perkins, confirmed it. So I tried to track down the two women. The producer who told me about this said she might go on the record if I get one of the women to talk. And I couldn't get the women to talk. I tracked down Zelda to Guatemala, where she had escaped to raise horses. Right. She would not talk. Rowena, she was lost somewhere in Asia. I couldn't find her. I confronted Harvey Weinstein in a very dramatic final interview with him in a small conference room, just the two of us. And I said, Harvey, did you rape Rowena Chu at the 1998 Venice Film Festival? He stood up from his chair and he stood over me, across from me at the small conference table, and he clenched his fists.
No.
And he started screaming at me, if you run that story, it will destroy my marriage. It will shame my 3 teenage daughters and ruin their lives. You can't run that story. I thought since he's standing and I'm sitting, he's going to take a poke at me.
Sure.
So I stand up and face him. And as soon as I stood up and faced him, what did Harvey do? He totally surprised me. He started to cry. And he said, I'm not guilty. I didn't do that. It was a consensual affair with Rowena Chu. And so then David Remnick, the editor of the New Yorker, and I caucus. And what are we going to do? We have Harvey denying what no women will confirm is true.
Right.
And so Remnick made the decision, which I totally supported. The New Yorker is not the National Enquirer. We cannot run a story based on conjecture. And actually, if we had run the story at the time, one of the things I report in my book, Rowena Chu was not raped by Harvey in 1998. I would have printed a falsehood there. She was attacked by him, and he attempted to rape her, but she escaped.
Oh, yes. Right.
In any case, we did not. That's why we didn't run the story at the time. But there was so much in the story. It was a 20,000-word story about Harvey's abusive behavior, not sexual behavior, but his abusive behavior.
Sure.
That, it portrayed him in a very unflattering light, and he hated the profile.
And bullying, right? He would throw staplers at staffers and the like.
Yeah, he was a very tough boss.
Years later, in 2017, you were able to share all these copious notes with Ronan Farrow and Jodi Kantor and Megan Twohey of the New York Times. And this was portrayed, of course, in the upcoming film and their book, She Said. Can you talk to me a little bit about that transition of all the research you had done?
Sure. I had no contact with Jodi and Megan Twohey at the Times. My only contact was with Ronan Farrow. He came to me in the spring of 2017, and he said he was working on a story on Harvey Weinstein. He interviewed me on the phone, and I had been wary of him because I knew the issue he had with his father, Woody Allen. And I wondered, is he a journalist or is he a zealot? I was convinced in my conversation that he was a journalist. He was a
serious,
fair-minded, serious guy. He said, can I have access to your papers, which are on file at the New York Public Library in Manhattan? And I gave him permission. He then called me up at the end of the spring and he said, can I come in? Can I interview you? I said, sure, but you're going to have to come out. I was in Bridgehampton finishing a book on another subject. I said, you have to come out there. And he came out there in July of 2017. We did a 3-hour interview. I said, so what have you got? He said, I've got 3 women on camera saying that Harvey abused them. I've got 5 women on camera, but their names are shielded and their faces are shielded, unlike the 3. And they claim the same thing, that Harvey abused them. And I've got the audio tape of the Italian model who claimed in 2015 that Harvey grabbed her breasts, and we acknowledged in the audio tape that he had done that. I said, my God, you've broken the story. You've got it. This is great. And I said, what's the next step? He said, well, I'm doing it for NBC, and I meet with the president of NBC News on August 8th. On August 9th, I called Ronan. I said, so how'd you do? And he said, they killed the story and they killed my show on NBC. So I don't have it. I said, give me your number, I'll call you back. And I then called David Remnick, the editor of the New Yorker, and I said, David, this kid, Ronan Farrow, I think has broken the case that we couldn't break. And he said, have him call me on Monday. I called Ronan Farrow back. I said, call Remnick at this number. And then he went and he broke the story in October of 2017, which is the same month that the two New York Times reporters did, both of them doing brilliant jobs exposing this beast.
And then, of course, Megan and Jody would go on to win the Pulitzer that year for their reporting.
As did Ronan Farrow.
As did Ronan Farrow, right? That's great. That's very fair. Yeah, deservedly, for sure. So your book, I think, is remarkable because you treat Weinstein like a three-dimensional human rather than a caricatured monster. You write extensively about his childhood, his family, his genius for making really incredible films, as well as his heinous and vile behavior. Weinstein was raised in Flushing, Queens, with his younger brother Bob and his parents Miriam and Max, after which Miramax, the company, would be named. His mother, you write, berated him for his grades and weight. They called her Mama Portnoy, right? He called her Mama Portnoy. Can you tell me a little bit about his childhood and his home life and his relationship with his mother?
Well, they lived in a housing development in Queens, a working class family. His father was a diamond cutter in the jewelry district of Manhattan. His mother, Miriam, was very smart, but she was a very dominant person in that household. And she yelled so much, in fact, that Harvey and his friends who played poker at a different house every weekend, his friends would not agree to play poker in Harvey's house. Why? Because, as his friends who I interviewed said to me, Miriam yelled too much. Harvey, stop beating so much. Harvey, stop talking. Harvey this, Harvey that. She was just a really dominant personality in that household. And if you look at Miramax and the yelling that took place in that office, which is, I report on the book as I did in the 2002 profile, that was very much a reflection of how Miriam Weinstein normalized that kind of behavior. And so she was a very impressive, very smart woman, very dominant woman, but she yelled a lot.
And I think, we do model our parents to some extent. In high school, he was already modeling his mother by praising people one moment and then abusing them the next. He was a bully. And by college, he was promoting musical events. And you write in your book that he approximated Marlon Brando in The Godfather, or he aspired to.
Well, it's interesting. Harvey, I did a fair amount of interviewing of people who grew up with him in Queens and people who went to the University of Buffalo with him. Mm-hmm. And I found no evidence that Harvey Weinstein abused women in high school, junior high school, or his first 3 years at the University of Buffalo. It was only after he dropped out and became a very successful rock promoter, only when he had power, did Harvey begin to abuse women. And it escalated the more power he got. So power for him became a kind of aphrodisiac. He was not a particularly attractive man. He had acne skin. He didn't date very much in high school or even the first 3 years at Buffalo. He dated some, but not extensively. But I literally interviewed the woman who I think was the first woman he raped, Hope D'Amour, who worked for him at Harvey and Corky Presents, the rock promotion company was called.
And this was back in the 70s, right?
Early 70s.
I think Harvey's story is really tragic because Miramax, under him and Bob, produced some of the best American films of the past 30 years. And, in what ways did Miramax change the movie industry? They produced and championed independent films, for starters, right? And they also disrupted the Hollywood studio system. What else can you say about Miramax as a cultural entity?
Well, they actually proved that you could make a successful independent movie about something.
Mhm.
And you think My Left Foot, The Crying Game, Pulp Fiction.
Yeah. The
I mean, it's
piano,
quite
it goes on and on.
extraordinary.
Sure.
The galaxy of movies they produced. They won 81 Academy Awards. That's
Yeah.
pretty extraordinary.
Pretty
So
impressive.
they put pressure on the big studios to try and do better movies, which they didn't do. I mean, big studios tended in the 70s they were doing some
Yeah,
terrific movies,
for sure.
but they went to the Supermans and the Batmans, etc. But Disney in 1993, after the success of that year of The Crying Game, Disney decided they had to try and buy Miramax. And because Miramax was one of the few studios, very much like Disney, where
Mhm.
the brand, if you said Miramax, you knew that they were going to do serious, good movies. If you said Disney, you knew they were going to do child-friendly movies.
Oh, yes.
And so Michael Eisner said, we don't have much of a library at Disney. And the only other studio that has a brand is Miramax. We're going to buy them. And for roughly $80 million,
$80 million.
they acquired Miramax. And what that allowed Miramax and Harvey and his brother Bob to do, before that, they were basically distributors. They would buy movies that someone else had created and made. They had the good taste to decide, this will be a good movie,
Oh, yeah.
but they didn't actually start at the beginning and create it. But with Disney's money, they were able to produce as well as distribute movies.
Which is so fascinating to me that they really worked off of the steam of Disney's capital on some level, on a very major literal level.
Right.
So Harvey attacked at one point. He attacks Agia Argento, the actress, in 1997. The same year, I believe, he also smeared Ashley Judd's name or reputation in Hollywood after she rejected him. He tried to attack Gwyneth Paltrow, but Brad Pitt intervened. I'd like to take a second just to read her comment in your book. Why, I asked Paltrow, did she continue working with Harvey and Miramax after that? She could have been speaking for much of Hollywood when she answered, we all knew he was hitting on all of us. It was sort of an eye roll. Of course it was more. But she says it was not common knowledge that he sexually assaulted women. The bind so many were in, she said, was that he had so much power. He was making all of these great movies. And I was about to be in those movies. How do you calibrate that? We all wanted to make excuses for a lot of his behavior over the years because of the movies he was making. It's very powerful.
It was very powerful. And if you think about it, if you've got 5 major studios and they're producing, let's say they're creating 100 movies a year. And if you're a serious actor, actress, or director, or screenwriter, you want your movies to climb the mountaintop and win an Oscar. You want to be in serious things that you can tell your kids, your children, I started in that movie. And so if you're an actor or actress or director, ambitious and talented, you wanted to go to a place that was making those kind of movies that might put you in the next realm.
And this contributed.
That was Harvey's, that was part of his magnetic field.
And would you say this was probably, a big part of the culture of silence is you keep quiet in order to get ahead in these sort of prestige films?
Yeah, even if you look at, I covered his criminal trial in New York. I was there every day. And if you look at the 6 women who testified, 4 of them continued to have relationships with Harvey of some kind, sometimes consensual sex, and sometimes just, advice, etc. So why did they go to his hotel suite and not knowing they were going to be raped, but nevertheless go? They went to him because they wanted to be in the movie business, and they wanted to be in working in these fantastic movies that Miramax and Harvey Weinstein was producing and distributing. And so they made that concession, but they didn't know they were going to get raped. But then in the trial, one of the huge issues became, how do you explain why these women kept in touch with Harvey? Harvey's explanation for it is that proves my relationship was consensual. It proves I didn't rape these women.
And that
but it doesn't prove that.
No, of course not.
One of the women, a woman from Temple University, Dr. Barbara Ziv, testified, and she said something so powerful, factually powerful. You could watch the jury writing it down. She said that 40% of the women in America who are raped continue to have a relationship with the person who raped them. And you get to various reasons why. And it came out in the trial, and she presented, but so did the women who were victimized by Harvey. They were embarrassed. They were in denial that it ever happened. They blamed themselves. They were frightened of Harvey's power. I mean, all sorts of reasons that help explain it.
Ken, a big part of this also were the NDAs, right? That Weinstein and his lawyers disseminated. Can you talk to us a little bit about those?
Yeah. Well, what the NDAs that Harvey, we don't know the exact number, but his lawyer told me at least a dozen, maybe more. An NDA is the lawyer goes to the woman who they're afraid is going to bring charges against Harvey, and they say, if you sign this agreement, non-disclosure agreement, that's what NDA means, we will give you X dollars in return, but you have to agree never to speak a word of this to anyone, including your family or your psychiatrist. It is buried. When I investigated Harvey in 2002, I thought maybe I'd find some documents in the courts in England or in the United States, which would prove that he did these things. And then I didn't need the woman to talk to me. It would be in the court record. But there was no court record, I found. And the reason there was no court record, what Harvey did with an NDA is his lawyer would go to these women, and the two women in the Venice Film Festival, he paid roughly $250,000 to each of them. They signed a non-disclosure agreement. They never got a copy of the non-disclosure agreement. It never went to a court. It went to the lawyer's office and remained a private document. So it was never a public document. That's why I couldn't find it. And so if you're willing, as Harvey was, to pay money up front, you can bury all this stuff, which is what he did.
To that point, what role did the lax press play in enabling his behavior? You mentioned Peter Biskind at Premiere Magazine in your book, and his attempt to write an expose as far back as 1991, as well as Lloyd Grove at the Washington Post, and how easily they were cowed or seduced by Harvey. I mean, what role?
Actually, Biskind, those are not good examples of being cowed and produced. What Harvey did, and this is where the portrait of power becomes important, which I tried to do in the book. Harvey had a book publishing arm, Talk Books.
Yes.
He would give out book contracts to reporters. The editor of Page Six got a book contract. Mika and Joe got a book contract.
Morning, Joe.
Tim Russert, who actually produced the bestseller, got a book contract. He sprinkled these book contracts.
Is this Tina Brown?
Pardon?
Tina Brown, right? Was the publisher?
No, Tina Brown was the editor of Talk Magazine.
Talk Magazine. Okay.
And she actually oversaw the book.
The book. That's what I thought. Okay.
The book as well, but she was not involved in deciding who gets the book contracts in the press. But the press Harvey would invite them to his openings and his private soirees, and he would give out sometimes screenwriter contracts, sometimes book contracts. He would say, you can sit here, and many of these reporters told me they saw actors and actresses snorting cocaine, and they never wrote about that. Right. I mean, they were part of Harvey's team in a way, and they never pursued what, I mean, if they didn't know Harvey was raping women, and many, I'm sure most did not know, they should have known. They should have pursued that story.
I mean, it's possible that they turned a blind eye, right, for their book deal. I mean,
many people turned a blind eye, including people who work for Harvey. I mean, I tell the story in the book of a young woman who came for a job interview in 1998 at Miramax, and she's very attractive, and she gets in the elevator, and Harvey Weinstein was in the elevator, and he looks her up and down. He said, "What are you doing here?" This is in Tribeca. And she said, "Well, I'm going to interview the head of human resources for a job." He says, "Come and see me when you're done." So she comes down to Harvey's office with the head of human resources. Harvey looks at her and he said, "How'd it go?" And she said, "It went great." And he said, "You're hired." He didn't even consult the head of human resources. He looked at this attractive woman and he said, "You're hired." She had a long planned vacation, 3 weeks, and she comes back, and the day before she's to start work, she gets a call from 4 employees of Miramax, and they said, "We'd like to take you out for a drink tonight." And she said, "Great." And she thought, "Oh my God, what a welcoming place this is. What a great sense of community Miramax seems to have. I'm so thrilled." But what happened when she went for a drink with these 4 employees? One was in human resources, worked. 2 others were executives within Miramax, and the 4th was in one of Harvey's 4 assistants. They say to her, "You don't want to come to work here." She said, "Why?" He said, "He will rape you if you come here. He will abuse you. Don't come." So these 4 people knew what Harvey was up to.
Sure.
So that tells you that a fair number of people know.
Harvey got involved with politics at a certain point. He became close friends with Bill and Hillary Clinton.
Right.
Did they know of the rumors of his behavior? Is that fair to say? Did they at least who heard the rumors?
Well, Lena Dunham says that she tried to warn Nick Merrill, who is Hillary's press secretary, and that don't have anything to do with Harvey Weinstein. This is in 2016 presidential campaign when she was running against Trump. And that obviously never got to Hillary, or if it did, she ignored it because they continue to keep in touch with Harvey, who gave her fundraisers, etc.
Sure.
Now, did Lena Dunham really do this? She said she did. Nick Merrill says she didn't.
Miramax has also long been called the house that Tarantino built after Reservoir Dogs in 1992, Pulp Fiction in 1994, and then Tarantino's Inglourious Basterds saved the Weinstein Company from bankruptcy in 2009. Tarantino in 2017 admitted to Toohey and Cantor of the New York Times that he knew Harvey had assaulted Uma Thurman and Mira Sorvino. Please tell us about Tarantino's long, close relationship with Harvey. And I'm going to ask it, is he complicit on some level?
Of course he's complicit. I mean, he knew. He confessed that he knew. And so he's complicit, sure. And he's one of, he admitted it. Most of the people who are complicit don't admit it.
They don't, okay.
But it doesn't put him in a good...
No, of course not. Of course not. Do you think that people like Weinstein and maybe Woody Allen and Roman Polanski feel entitled to their behavior as a kind of justification for their brilliance and success? And, you mentioned Caravaggio, Ezra Pound, Picasso's bad behaviors, and how we struggle to separate the artist from the person when the person is rotten. Please talk about this a little bit.
One of the challenges I had in writing this book, I think of Harvey as a monster. I think he's properly found guilty in a New York court of criminal behavior towards women. But I also think if you look at his whole life, I mean, this guy who did, as you mentioned earlier, some extraordinary movies, a guy who had real talent, a guy who had a real impact, a positive impact on the movie business. And how do you write a book about a person that doesn't include the good stuff as well? So when I look at Picasso and I think, or Ezra Pound was a fascist. Picasso abused women. But do I deny Picasso's talent as an artist because he treated women in a miserable way, or Ezra Pound's talent as a poet because he was a disgusting fascist? I think you have to be willing to
separate,
put all that out if you're writing about human beings.
You describe Hollywood's culture of silence as an abnormal male sexual aggression that was thought to be common, fit for private whispers but not public shame. Can you speak a little bit more about Hollywood's culture of silence?
Well, one of the things that's unusual about Hollywood, if you think about insurance companies or you think about automobile companies, you don't have beautiful young women working side by side with powerful directors, producers, studio heads, etc. And so here, these women who want to be in the movie business, right? Sure. And they see Harvey Weinstein and they say, "Oh, Mr. Weinstein, I love your movies. Oh, Mr. Weinstein, that talk you gave the other day was so smart. Oh, Mr. Weinstein, you recruit brilliant actors to be in your movies." It is not uncommon for someone with a large ego, and many of these powerful men have large egos, to confuse a compliment with a come on.
Sure.
And what happens after that is that they then feel they've got a pass permission to go to the next step. But what Harvey did is not typical casting couch in Hollywood. Rape is a criminal offense.
Oh yeah. Okay,
And so he took it beyond what was more normal in Hollywood.
Back to Ronan Farrow for a second. You write about how he began investigating Weinstein for MSNBC, but George Pataki, Governor George Pataki at the time, had warned Harvey about it.
Yes.
My God.
Harvey was an equal opportunity giver.
Mm-hmm.
So when he thought he gave money, even though he's a Democrat and proclaimed himself a liberal, he supported George Pataki and raised a lot of money for him. Mm-hmm. I was talking to his daughter about doing a book, etc. And so when Pataki got word or wind of the fact that Ronan Farrow was investigating Harvey, Pataki called up Harvey and alerted him, beware of this guy, Ronan Farrow. He's investigating you. And Harvey, one of the things I have a whole chapter in the book about what happened as Harvey's world begins to crumble in 2017. When he gets word that Ronan Farrow is after him, the New York Times after him, Rose McGowan has a biography that's coming out, a memoir that maybe will expose him because he had signed a non-disclosure agreement with her after he raped her some years before. And so Harvey is desperately trying to plug the holes in the dam and the dike and keeping from drowning. And then it all comes rushing in and drowns him in the fall of 2017.
And during this period, he's in a state of panic and paranoia. You write this incredible, almost cinematic episode where he goes to Gwyneth Paltrow's Amagansett, Long Island home, and she hides in the bathroom and calls Megan Twohey and Jodi Kantor from the Times.
She called Jodi Kantor, one of the two.
Jodi Kantor on guidance for guidance on how to handle him. What?
And when I interviewed her, she said to me, Harvey said to me that he was invited to speak at this event. Gwyneth Paltrow, when I interviewed her, said, I didn't invite him. I didn't want him in my house. Right. He invaded my house. And I was terrified. So I hid in the bathroom upstairs.
Let's talk about Bob for a second, his brother. He realized that the Weinstein name was a problem, right? A kind of a scarlet letter of sorts once the allegation came out. So how has he reacted to the investigation and to the trial and to the destruction of this company, this family business that they built together?
Well, one of the things that's amazing when you look at it, I mean, I write a lot about the relationship between the brothers who were so close for all through their lives. And in the end, Bob, in the fall of 2017, provided the vote to fire. He fired his brother. Hasn't talked to him. No longer talks to him. Nor do Harvey's 3 daughters from his first marriage talk to him. Most of his friends are gone. I mean, he's a man who sits in a wheelchair in a hospital ward in a prison with a stent in his heart, stenosis, which is why he's in a wheelchair, and high cholesterol, dramatically high, bad diabetes, and yet he still eats chocolate. And he's blind in one eye with glaucoma. So he's this very alone figure. But one of the things that's a vivid story to me, at least, is that when Harvey is convicted and exposed, first exposed and then later convicted, the other victim was Bob Weinstein. Bob Weinstein couldn't get an agent, couldn't hire a Hollywood lawyer, even though in many ways he made more money for Miramax with it. He had Dimension Films, scary movie and all that.
Scream, right? Yeah.
And yet people didn't want to go near him because his name, as you said, was Weinstein. He's now more active in coming back some, but nevertheless, he suffered as his brother Harvey did.
So there was a domino effect with Weinstein, right? That led to a spate of other high-profile individuals being accused of sexual misconduct. I'd like to take a second and just read some of the names from your book. CEO Les Moonves from CBS Chairman and CEO Les Moonves, actor Kevin Spacey, New York State Attorney General Eric Schneiderman, the Today Show host Matt Lauer, hip-hop mogul Russell Simmons, comedian Louis C.K., R&B singer R. Kelly, convicted pedophile Jeffrey Epstein, 60 Minutes executive producer Jeff Fager, Charlie Rose, Senator Al Franken, Amazon studio chief Roy Price, chief creative officer of Pixar and Disney Animation John Lasseter, Metropolitan Opera conductor James Levine, editor of the Paris Review Lawrence Stein, director Brian Singer, photographer Mario Testino, chef Mario Batali, and then, of course, just last year, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. So this was all just in the last 5 or 6 years, really, since
Right.
Weinstein was the first domino, I would say, that started this effect.
One of Harvey Weinstein's legacies is to give breadth and impetus to the Me Too movement, and which has exposed a lot of male misbehavior.
Sure.
And that's one of Harvey's legacies. And it's very hard. I mean, maybe Larry Nassar is the only one who's more extreme than Harvey in terms of his behavior. But one of the things that's happened is Me Too has done much more good than bad.
Oh, sure.
But one of the more negative things, and it's minor compared to the good they've done, is that they tend to group all male misbehavior in with Harvey Weinstein. Well, you know, Charlie Rose, Matt Lauer, I mean, they did things that they should be shamed for and exposed, but they didn't rape women.
It's not on the same level. The crime.
And Al Franken, the former senator, was forced to resign. I mean, he didn't do that. Forcible kissing someone is not rape. And so one of the things we have to do as journalists and as human beings, I think, is discriminate and recognize different gradations. And if we believe, as most of us say we do, in the power of pardon or the power of rehabilitation, then if someone has done something wrong and they can demonstrate that they are shamed, that they're embarrassed, that they are trying to reform themselves, that they are apologetic, then we have to be willing to give a pardon to some of those people. Not to Harvey Weinstein. He's in jail and he deserves to be in jail.
Yes, absolutely.
Larry Nassar, the same thing.
Sure.
But we have that spirit of generosity has not yet come to be.
Let's talk about the trial for a moment. Harvey's defense attorney, the first defense attorney, Brafman, quit. Saying quit because he said that Harvey Weinstein was the worst person he had ever met, and he represented Sammy the Bull Gravano, an assortment of gangsters and murderers, but Weinstein was still the worst. I just wanted to point that out because that was very telling.
Ben Brafman denies he said that.
Okay.
But his good friend, one of his closest friends, who since has died, told me that Ben told him that.
Also, what I found interesting in your book with regard to the trial is that Gloria Allred was one of the prosecutors representing 3 of Harvey's accusers, and her daughter, Lisa Bloom, worked for Harvey. Is that correct?
Oh, she's a lawyer, and she's been very prominent in the Me Too movement and feminist movement. Yet she went to work for Harvey, who had bought her book to make into a movie. And so she was totally compromised and misbehaved in attacking the New York Times, etc. And ultimately was embarrassed, so embarrassed that even her mother didn't defend her, Gloria Allred.
Harvey made claims that he pioneered female filmmakers, and on some level he certainly did, like Jane Campion with The Piano, for example, and raised millions for charities, and that this should give him a free pass. This was one of his defenses. Is that right? Yes.
He talked about his philanthropic interests and the fact that he was close to Gloria Steinem. But he helped fund a chair, Gloria Steinem chair at New Jersey College. He was a feminist and a feminist supporter, Hillary, etc. But he thought that gave him a free pass.
Right.
And it didn't. And it shouldn't have.
Of course not. The prosecutors made the victims on some level into perpetrators, right? Using Harvey to advance their careers is what the argument was. This was Rosanna Arquette's concern from the beginning. Is that right?
Yeah, the Harvey's the key to Harvey's defense was to claim that he was the victim of these villainous women
Mhm.
who took advantage of him because they were overly ambitious. The challenge for the prosecution in the criminal trial here in New York, as it will be in Los Angeles, which is now ongoing,
I was just going to ask you about that. Yeah.
and is to convince a jury that that women who were abused by Harvey yet continued to keep in touch with him don't symbolize overly aggressive women who were overly ambitious, but symbolize normal behavior for victims of sexual abuse. And that's the challenge. And it's a big obstacle for the prosecution to overcome. Or, I mean, for instance, just the other day, Governor Newsom's wife, the governor of California,
Right.
claimed that she was raped by Harvey Weinstein. Yet Harvey's lawyer then produced, 2 years after she claimed to have been raped by Harvey, he produced an email showing that she reached out to Harvey and asked him for advice.
Hmm.
And so there in the trial, they're going to have to explain why
Sure.
that was normal and not peculiar behavior.
How does this all correlate to what you write about in the book called Relabeling? They claim that Annabella Sciorra suffered from this complex when recounting Weinstein's rape of her. This was another point of contention on the part of the prosecutors, right? That the women were
Harvey-
misremembering.
Yeah, no, Harvey's defense brought to the witness stand a memory expert, and she claimed that as time passes, your memory gets corrupted and changed, and you read press accounts of Harvey's behavior, and that creates a kind of a fevered memory of Harvey. And so the argument was that Annabelle Sciorra, who claimed she was raped in 93 or 94, she didn't know which, she didn't remember the exact month
Right.
and year that this event occurred, but that after so many years, her memory was basically corrupted. And it's very normal to have been corrupted. We forget as time passes.
Did the prosecution bring in a psychologist to testify that her memory was likely accurate, or
Well, what the prosecutor did, Jonah Luzzi, who's a very, very good prosecutor, she asked very tough questions of Harvey's memory expert and trapped her into explaining things she couldn't remember. Well, do you remember this? And she couldn't remember things. So she said, so your memory is faulty too, right?
Yeah.
But with the big prosecution witness to counter the memory was Dr. Barbara Ziv, who claimed that this is normally how a woman who is abused responds is very normal what the women in Harvey's case did.
How long was the trial, and of course, what was the verdict and sentence, Ken?
The trial began on January 6, 2020. Harvey was sentenced on March 11th, 2020. The actual trial was 2 months, and then there's a delay before the sentence was administered. He was found guilty of 2 of the 5 counts. He was sentenced to 23 years in prison at the Wen Correctional Facility just outside of Buffalo, where he went to college. And now he's been transferred to stand trial in Los Angeles. So he's in prison in Los Angeles.
And right, I was just going to ask you about that. There's a case now in LA, and there was a New York Times article about a week and a half ago. You and I spoke about this last week, and I found it to be kind of mystifying in that what it suggested the outcome of that trial could mean for Weinstein. Can you explain what you explained to me last week about that process in LA, the trial in LA with the verdict?
He served 2 years, roughly a little over 2 years of his sentence, in 23-year sentence in New York. He goes to LA. If he is found innocent in LA, he goes back to prison in New York State. He may have a trial. There's a potential trial in London of 2 counts, which he will still face. If he's found guilty in LA, he will go back to serve out his prison sentence in New York, finish that, and then be shifted back to LA in a prison. LA is potential. If he lost on all 11 counts, he would potentially face over 100 years in prison.
Gosh.
So But then the other wrinkle in this is Harvey appealed to the appellate division of the New York State Higher Court,
Right.
and he lost that appeal. But now the State Court of Appeals, the highest court in the state, is going to review his case. So it is possible, not likely, but possible, that if the Court of Appeals decides differently than the appellate division did and decides to throw out the case in New York, and if Harvey is not found guilty in Los Angeles, that he would be out of prison, but then New York, the district attorney in New York, would bring charges again and retry Harvey.
Okay.
So, and he's in bad health. My guess
Right,
is
of
that
course.
Harvey's will spend the rest of his life in prison.
Have you heard from Harvey since the book has come out, or?
Well, you know, I tried to interview Harvey. I mean, I had all those interviews from my 2002 profile, and I talked to everyone, especially a lot of time with his brother, Bob. But Harvey, we were going to do an interview, and he finally relented to my terms, which is everything is on the record and I tape it, and I can ask him anything I want. His lawyer in LA then intervened and said, I can't allow my client who's going on trial to talk to you and risk saying things that could compromise my defense of him in LA. Harvey then agreed to answer my email questions. And so we, in the book, I disclose the questions. I mean, throughout the book, I ask him these questions, I give his answers. But the bigger questions I wanted to ask him in person, you know, on a phone interview from prison, was he didn't answer when I sent him an email. And that question, among the questions, would have been this: Harvey, when you put your head on a pillow at night after you raped, let's say Jessica Mann, who was one of the women in the trial in New York who testified against him, how did you explain to yourself what you had just done to Jessica Mann? And I'm just fascinated by what he would have said. I suspect he would have said it was a trade. She wanted something from me, a career in the movie business, and I wanted something from her, sex, fair trade. And she willingly consented to do that. I mean, in the end, I tried hard to figure out what moved Harvey. Did some incident happen in his childhood? Was there a rosebud that explained his behavior? And in the end, I just concluded, after talking to many psychiatrists and specialists, that Harvey's a sociopath.
And I have to say, Ken, your book, my master's is in clinical psychology, and your book really does read like a very rigorous clinical examination of a psyche. You really feel like you're trying to get at something, trying to understand something core about a person who's done something horrific. We'll be taking questions for Ken in a few minutes, so please start sending them in. While we wait for questions, Ken, I have one final question of my own. How did the trial of Harvey Weinstein change things in Hollywood and in the United States, particularly regarding Me Too? And of course, we should name the founder of Me Too. Her name is Tarana Burke. So much of this feels cultural to me. It feels like a culture that needed to be reset. Not just Hollywood, but maybe media, maybe the United States, maybe the Western world itself. Maybe talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, I don't think there's any question in my mind, at least, Brian, that Me Too and what happened to Harvey has triggered changes and more defensive behavior, maybe better behavior from men who are afraid of getting caught. I mean, one of the problems is that men think with the wrong part of their body, not with their brain. And they're surrounded by these beautiful women and who are complimenting them. And so they take license from that. The question in my mind, I know there's been a short-term effect. I know that male executives are very wary of meeting alone with a woman or keeping their door closed when they meet alone with a woman, and are very sensitive about the language they use and whether they give compliments about someone's dress or not. And there's no question that I suspect that in the short term, there's less abusive behavior, less sexual harassment from men. The question is the long term.
Mm.
Is this an interim thing that will dissipate and people will go back to their old ways because they think with the wrong part of their anatomy, or does it represent a fundamental change?
Mm.
I don't know the answer to that. I think I know the answer that in the short term, it's had an impact.
For sure. Okay, we have our first question. Can you talk a little bit about Bob Weinstein and his relationship with his older brother? Why do you think Bob Weinstein agreed to be interviewed by you for your book?
Bob is 2 years younger than Harvey, and Harvey was always the dominant brother. They shared a bedroom in Flushing, Queens.
Mhm.
Bob followed Harvey, went to Fredonia, which is near the University of Buffalo, entered and worked for Harvey in the record promotion business. The Harvey and Corky Presents. But then they came to New York in 1979 and started Miramax, and they became equal partners in that, and they were extraordinarily close. I mean, they talked 5 times a day. Bob's then wife, who we met in Buffalo, would say, "Stop, go to bed, come to bed, stop talking to your brother on the phone." And they were just extremely close. And Bob is talented. Bob was a better businessman than Harvey. He was more careful about spending money. Harvey's problem is that he has impulse control problems. He couldn't control his sexual urge. He couldn't control his eating. He couldn't control his smoking. He couldn't control his yelling at people. Bob was a more restrained, though Bob was a very miserable boss in the early years. Bob then became an alcoholic, and he went into therapy and conquered his alcoholism and became, I think, a better person. And in the end, even though he always was the junior brother in many ways, seeking Harvey's approval, in the end, when he learned the extent of Harvey's misbehavior with women in the fall of 2017, he provided the critical vote on the board of directors to fire his brother. And they still don't talk.
Another question just came in. This is interesting because both Harvey and Donald Trump are from Queens, and of course this program is for the Queens Public Library. I myself am from Queens as well, so it's disturbing to me to think that Harvey and Trump are both from the same borough. But be that as it may, did Harvey ever socialize with Trump, to your knowledge? Did they have any kind of friendship?
No. He claimed to be anti-Trump. He met him, certainly. And Harvey knew Jeffrey Epstein, as did Trump. And at one point, Harvey with Jeffrey Epstein, tried to buy New York Magazine. So I don't know enough about the Epstein-Harvey relationship and whether he ever crossed paths with Donald Trump. But Harvey and Jeffrey Epstein had some similarities about their attitude towards women, as does Donald Trump.
Absolutely. Another question. Clearly, this story is not over. Do you think you will have a revised edition of Hollywood Ending as the Weinstein story continues? What was the most enjoyable aspect of writing this book? What were some of the frustrations?
I'm done with Harvey Weinstein.
Okay.
I'm not going back there. I mean, I'll make some changes, I'm sure, in editions for the paperback when it comes out. But essentially, I'm cooked on
20
on
years
Harvey
is a long
Weinstein.
time. Yeah.
What was the most enjoyable part for me was seeing his movies and rewatching his movies, which I did. And it was quite stunning. The hardest part for me was to climb out of myself in writing this book, to be a man who I think of as a monster, a beast, doing terrible things to people. Not just women, by the way. I mean, the most awful things were the women, but I mean, he abused his staff and
berated them.
He was just a bully. He was, in many ways, a terrible guy. So can I climb out of my dislike of him to write fairly of him and his talent and the movies that I rewatched that I so admired? That was hard, and I tried hard to do that, and hopefully I succeeded.
Well, yes, I mean, I think you did. The book is Hollywood Ending: Harvey Weinstein and the Culture of Silence. Thank you so much, Ken, for your discussion this evening. It was very illuminating and provocative. And
As were your questions, Brian. Thank you.
thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. Have a great evening and a safe weekend. Take care, everyone. Thank you.